So the circle of fifths is a very important tool for all musicians at all levels, but I think some of the videos out there really miss the point about what the basic purpose of this tool is and how to use it most effectively to become a better musician. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. So first let's talk about the name, the circle of fifths. The first part of that is pretty self-explanatory. It's a circular diagram. And the second part of the name, the circle of fifths, refers to this interval of a perfect fifth. And if the idea of a perfect fifth or the notation that I've used here is confusing to you, then you should go back and watch my 2 videos on intervals, and I'll link to those in the description. But for our purposes today, just understand that a perfect fifth is an interval that contains 5 alphabetical steps and 7 chromatic half steps. Okay? So at the top of our diagram here, we put the key of C. And you really want to think about the circle of fifths as sort of like a clock face, right? So there's going to be steps along this circular diagram, and up here at the top, instead of like a 12 o'clock position, we have the key of C. The reason that we put the key of C at the top of the diagram is that the key of C has no sharps and no flats. So it's just all the white keys on the piano. That's a good way to visualize it. And on all the other stops along our circle of fifths here, we're going to have a certain number of sharps and flats. And in fact, that's really one of the basic purposes of the circle of fifths, is just to figure out which sharps and which flats are contained in each key. So as we build our diagram here, we're going to start with the key of C, and as we go clockwise around the circle, we're going to ascend by a perfect fifth for each new step along the circle. Okay? So again, if this is confusing to you, go back and watch those videos on intervals. And that should clear everything up. But for now, we'll just go through this quickly. A perfect fifth above C would be G. A perfect fifth above G would be D. Perfect fifth above D would be A. A perfect fifth above A would be E. Perfect fifth above E would be B. A perfect fifth above B would actually be F sharp. And the reason we have to sharp that F, between B and F there would be 5 alphabetical steps, but if we just went to F natural, we would only have 6 chromatic half steps. So we need to add that sharp to make it 7 chromatic half steps. And then we go one more step to C sharp. And we're going to stop there. Now we could obviously continue going to G sharp, D sharp, A sharp, E sharp, etc. all the way around the circle, but we're going to stop at C sharp for a reason that will become clear in just a moment as we go and fill out the other side of the circle. Okay, so let's go on in the counterclockwise direction now. If when we went clockwise we ascended by a perfect fifth each time, then it makes sense that as we go counterclockwise we're going to descend by a perfect fifth each time. So if we descend a perfect fifth from C, that's going to bring us to F. If we descend a perfect fifth from F, that takes us to B flat. Perfect fifth down from B flat is E flat. Perfect fifth down from E flat is A flat. And now a perfect fifth down from A flat is the key of D flat. But you might notice that D flat and C sharp are actually the same note, or they're enharmonically equivalent, which means that they sound the same, and if you were to play them on a keyboard, you'd be playing the same key, but we name them differently, right? So a C sharp, and a D flat are enharmonic equivalents, right? So we're going to put those on the same position on the circle, because really they're the same key. If you were to play them on the piano, you would be playing the same keys, and they would sound the same. You would just name those keys differently. One would be named with sharps, one would be named with flats, and we'll talk about that in just a second. But just to finish out our circle here, F sharp is enharmonically equivalent to G flat, and that's down a perfect fifth from D flat. And then down a perfect fifth from G flat would be C flat, which is enharmonically equivalent to B. So you can think of the circle of fifths as running in both directions, basically, right? We have one direction that goes clockwise, okay? And then we have the other direction that goes counterclockwise, and they sort of overlap here at the bottom. So the clockwise direction and the counterclockwise direction overlap at these 3 enharmonically equivalent keys right here, okay? So as we go clockwise, remember how we talked about how the key of C has no sharps and no flats, right? So the key of C is just all white keys or just A through G alphabetically, right? No sharps, no flats. So every time we go one stop clockwise on the circle, we're going to add one sharp to the key signature, or add one sharp to the key, right? So when we go to the key of G, we would now have one sharp instead of 0. When we go to the key of D, we now have two sharps instead of 0 or 1. A would have 3 sharps, E would have 4 sharps, B would have 5 sharps, F sharp would have 6 sharps, and C sharp would have 7 sharps, okay? Now, a couple things you're probably wondering. Number one, which sharps do we add? In what order? So there's actually a very specific order in which we're going to add the sharps. And we call this the order of sharps. And the order of sharps is really easy to remember because it actually is just contained right here in the circle. It's F, C, G, D, A, E, B. So you just start on F, and each sharp is a fifth above the previous sharp. So this is your order of sharps right here, okay? So, for example, the key of G would have one sharp, and that sharp would be F sharp, meaning the only difference between the key of G and the key of C is that the key of G has an F sharp instead of an F natural. The only difference between the key of D and the key of C is that the key of D would have 2 of those notes sharped, and they would be F and C. So the key of D has an F sharp and a C sharp instead of an F natural and a C natural. And you could continue that all the way down here. So basically, key of A would have 3 sharps, and it would be the first 3 on this list. Key of E would have 4 sharps. It would be the first 4 on this list. Key of B would have 5 sharps, the first 5 on this list, and etc., all the way out to C sharp. And you'll notice that C sharp would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sharps. But if you count the number of letters that we have in our musical alphabet, we only have 7 letters, right? So if we tried to go further than C sharp and add 8 sharps or 9 sharps or whatever, we would actually have to go back to the beginning of our cycle and start doubling up on those sharps. We would have all 7 notes sharped and then also an F double sharp, right? So, and theoretically those things can exist. We do have there is such thing as a double sharp and a double flat. But just for the purposes of simplicity, we're going to stop at C sharp so that we can just deal with only the 7 sharps without worrying about double sharps or double flats or anything like that. So think of the clockwise direction of the circle as basically a journey from the key of C, which has no sharps and no flats, all the way through the key of C sharp, where now every single note is the sharp version of itself instead of the natural version of itself. So the key of C sharp has 7 sharps, key of C has no sharps, and everything in between here has however many sharps, or it has the number of sharps that it takes to get to that place on the circle from our starting point of C, okay? Now the counterclockwise direction works exactly the same way with one crucial difference. Instead of adding a sharp, we're going to add a flat instead. So as we go counterclockwise, each step along the circle, we're going to add one flat to that key signature. And if you know the order of sharps, then the order of flats actually becomes very, very easy to remember because it's just the exact opposite. So the order of flats, instead of F, C, G, D, A, E, B, it's B, E, A, D, G, C, F. So if you can remember that the order of sharps just starts with F on the circle and goes through B, and then the order of flats is the exact opposite, then this becomes really easy to memorize, right? So just to go through that, just like we did on the sharp side, the key of F would have one flat, and that flat would be B flat. So the only difference between the key of F and the key of C is that the B is flat instead of natural, right? Now in the key of B flat, we would have 2 flats. So obviously the B would be flat, but then also we would have an E flat in addition to that. In the key of E flat now, the B flat and the E flat are flat, but then we have that additional A flat as well. In the key of A flat, we would have 1, 2, 3, 4 flats, the first 4 on this list. Key of D flat has the first 5 flats on this list. Key of G flat has the first 6 flats on this list. And key of C flat has all 7. So again, on the flat side, going counterclockwise, we stop at the C flat for the same reason that we stopped at the C sharp going clockwise, because once we get to C flat, we have flatted all 7 notes that we can flat, and we would have to go back and start doubling up the flats if we wanted to continue in this direction. So just one more word about about the keys on the bottom of the circle here, the ones that are enharmonically equivalent. The key of C sharp would have 7 sharps, and the key of D flat would have 5 flats. So even if you were to play these 2 keys on the piano, just play the scale up and down, it would look the same, it would sound the same. But the key of C sharp, we would name all of those accidentals with sharps, and with the key of D flat, we'd name all the accidentals with flats. So really, these are the same key as far as the sound is concerned, right? And as far as how you would play them on your instrument or play them on a piano, but they would be named different from a theoretical standpoint, right? So when you hear about musicians talking about learning things in all 12 keys, what they're talking about is the 12 positions along this circle of fifths. But really, if you want to be really particularly diligent about learning your keys, you would learn all 15 key signatures, even though 3 of those key signatures, or 3 sets of those key signatures, would sound the same in the end. You would still think about them differently. You'd think about one with sharps and the other one with flats. So now the question becomes, once we know how many sharps and flats are in each key and what they are, what do we do with that information? What good is that to us? Well, the first answer to that question, and really the most important answer to that question, is we use that to build scales. So the main purpose, in my opinion, of the circle of fifths is being able to use this information to conveniently build a major scale for any particular key. So when we're building scales, there are 2 very simple rules that we need to follow, or 2 steps to follow. The first one is simply to write the alphabet. So I'll write the ABCs. And by the alphabet, obviously I mean the musical alphabet, that's A through G. And with one additional caveat, you want to start the alphabet on the note of whatever key you're trying to write the scale for, right? So let's say I was trying to write the scale for the key of A flat, okay? Actually, I'll use a different one because A flat starts with A. Let's do E flat instead. So if I was trying to write the scale for the key of E flat, I would first write the musical alphabet with no sharps or flats. That's part of the next step, right? So just the letters, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, and then you can round it off with one more E at the end if you want. So if I was doing the key of A, for example, it would be A, B, C, D, E, F, G. If I was doing the key of D, it would be D, E, F, G, A, B, C. You're just going to write the musical alphabet in order, starting on whatever note is the root note of your key, ignoring the sharps and flats, okay? So this is our first step for the key of E flat, just writing E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E. The second step is just to add the appropriate sharps or flats. So in the key of E flat, how many flats do we have? Well, we count from C, which is 0, 1, 2, 3. So we know we have 3 flats. Now, which flats are they? Well, it would be the first 3 on this list, B flat, E flat, and A flat. So I'm going to write my alphabet one more time here, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, and E. And then I'm going to add those 3 flats that we decided to add, B flat, E flat, and A flat. So the B is flat instead of natural. The E is flat instead of natural. And see how that now takes care of the root note of our key. And then the A flat is also, or the A is also flat instead of natural. So now this is the E flat major scale. And it's really that simple. If you just follow these 2 steps, you'll be able to write any major scale for any key that you would ever encounter, okay? And you might have heard of some other methods of writing scales, like for example, some people talk about the whole, half, whole, half pattern of every major scale. And what that refers to is that in this scale, from E flat to F, that's a whole step. From F to G is a whole step. From G to A flat is a half step. From A flat to B flat is a whole step. B flat to C is a whole step. C to D is a whole step. And D to, oh, I forgot to flat the last E. It's D to E flat is a half step, okay? So this is the interval pattern of every major scale, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. But the problem with this is this doesn't always lead to you spelling the scale correctly, right? You're going to get the right notes or the enharmonic equivalents of the right notes, but there are a couple of rules for scale spelling that are really important that are taken care of by this method, and they are not taken care of by the whole, whole, half method. And those rules are that, first of all, we want one and only one of each alphabetical letter in a scale. So we want each letter to be represented in our scale, but we don't want any duplicates, right? So we don't want to skip any letters, and we don't want to double up on any letters. And the second rule of spelling scales, which really relates to the first, is that we don't want to mix sharps or flats. And the reason I say that relates to the first is because if you're mixing sharps and flats, then inevitably you're going to end up either skipping or doubling up on one of your letters, right? An example of how that might happen, an example of how someone might spell this scale incorrectly would be if they were to use the whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half method, starting at E flat. And so maybe they went, all right, E flat, whole step up is to F, another whole step up to G. But then here they said, all right, it's a half step, so a half step above G is G sharp, right? Cool, all right, and then they kept going from a whole step above G sharp is A sharp, and then a whole step above A sharp is, well, let's see, that's C, right? And then they continued on like this. Well, what's wrong with this spelling of the scale? We have two G's, and we skipped the B entirely, and we're mixing flats and sharps. So even though if you played this scale on the piano and it would sound correct, this is not the correct spelling of the scale, and this would create issues for all sorts of levels of theoretical analysis that you're doing of music if you're trying to use this as your E flat major scale. So before we wrap this up, let's do one more example with a different key using this same process for writing the scale. Let's use the key of D, okay? So the key of D, our first step would just be to write the alphabet starting on D. So that goes D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and then we'll round it off with one more D at the end, okay? Now we want to add our sharps or our flats. In this case, we're looking at the sharps side of the circle, and we're in the second position, so we would have two sharps in this key, and those two sharps would be from down here, F sharp and C sharp, the first two from the list. So we're gonna, I'll rewrite my alphabet here: D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D. We're gonna sharp the F and we're gonna sharp the C. And that's it. That's your scale right there. So that's your D major scale. And you can see how, really, it's a very quick and easy process, especially if you start to memorize the circle and memorize all your key signatures. It's a very quick and easy process to figure out what the scale for each key is and to spell it properly. And then this scale becomes the foundation for all of the higher things that we're going to be doing in music theory. All right, so that's it for today. Hopefully you found that helpful. If you have questions, leave them down in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe to my channel for more of the same. See you in the next video.